let's 1, 2, 3. Admit all. Ping, 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 ping. Hi, everybody.
Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, click dismiss. I can't connect to my own network meeting. This is a good start, isn't it?
Yes, it's a very good start. Well done. Congratulations.
Excellent. So, welcome to everybody for this afternoon. I believe that it is half term for quite a few of you. If it isn't half term, we do apologise. Either we are jealous that you had last week off, or we are really sorry for you that you've got another week to go before you have next week off. My goodness, that's a very long term. I don't think I could have gone that long.
No,
definitely not.
No.
Those of us that have a 2-week half term, however, we are ready to send our own kids back.
Struggling with the children.
Yeah, we've had enough now. Can we have them back? Okay, so welcome to everybody for this afternoon's session. I am delighted that this afternoon to welcome Lynn Howe from Positive Young Minds, who is going to talk to us about wellbeing. Do you want to say something?
No.
Oh, good.
I didn't want to say anything. I just want to say hi, Lynn.
Hi, Lynn. That's all.
Excellent. Happy to be here.
We are going to pass straight over to Lynn. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you. You see that? Is that okay?
It is working.
Fabulous. Okay. So I've just come today just to talk a bit about SENCO Wellbeing. So, I mean, a lot of it won't be stuff that you don't know already. So as I said on the agenda, some things are things you know already, and there's some research also about things you know already. And then we're going to talk about raising the SENCO profile and SENCO and school wellbeing as well. And I think sometimes in our world, it's just quite nice to share the things that we all know that are issues, and just to know that somebody else has got your back, really, and there's other people out there with similar issues. So I can't see the chat, but feel free to write in the chat as we go through, and Abigail and Gavin will keep an eye on that and either interrupt or go through anything at the end that anybody wants to say. So thank you for being here. So before we move on, just a little bit about my background. So I started off with my blog in 2020, positiveyoungmind.com, and I wasn't really sure where it would take me when I started it, because I was still working in a school. But it's been really useful since going self-employed to use the sort of a platform to launch off, really. So I wasn't expecting that, but it's been very helpful. So since going self-employed, I've been doing lots of writing, sort of SEND and wellbeing articles for education support and teacher toolkit. I edit Teacher Toolkit. I do consultancy in schools for wellbeing and SEND. I work with SEND Station as well, if any of you know them, and I train SENCOs through them. I've got a book deal with Hinton House, so I've got a couple of books coming out, one on SENCOs and one on early years foundation stage social, emotional, mental health, coming out next year. Just had a book out as well for a children's book. It's very exciting. I'm a massive advocator for SEND and inclusion, as well as teacher and school wellbeing. And yeah, you can find me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and everywhere, really. So just Google me and I shall turn up somewhere if you ever want to get in contact. I have got a bit of a cold as well, so sorry if I sound a bit nasally at the moment. It's been hanging around, unfortunately. So first of all, my journey so far didn't come into this by accident with the wellbeing side of things. So when I was an NQT back at year 0 of my teaching career, I had this really great idea that my career would just kind of go up and up and up and up. And then I did my MPQH, and I just had this great idea that I'd just be ahead and it would all be wonderful. And in reality, it didn't quite happen like that. So I had lots of good years in teaching and education, lots of fun. But I had to say it was kind of a bit more like this, really. So real life got in the way. Various things happened which impacted on wellbeing in schools. There was a few schools that I worked in that did not have wellbeing at the heart and were not great places to work. So I chose to move on from them. But all of those situations have kind of put me in the position that I'm in now, where I can support other schools. So I believe everything happens for a reason. So I've had those experiences which allow me to help other people. So my mission really is to support schools and individuals in advocating for mental health and mentally healthy workplaces with wellbeing at their heart. And I've got a lobster here because I was talking to interviewing somebody else, kind of explaining like it was like a pincer effect, really. So like a lobster, from a top down, I want to support organisations, head teachers and CEOs, and even go as far to sort of influence Ofsted government and support services in order to support from the top but also the bottom up. So just making sure that individuals have got the skills that they need, and the school staff as well in schools know what they can do to support their own wellbeing, just empowering people and just sharing with people that they have choices in how they support their own wellbeing. So ultimately, I believe that regardless of what you're trying to achieve in school, if you keep your staff happy, then your children are happy, and then you always end up with good or better outcomes. So, you know, I think sometimes these quick fixes for results are a bit of a means to an end, but actually if you focus on that well-being, everything else would take care of itself. That's my thoughts anyway. So Stephen Covey, famous man, his circle of concern and circle of influence is just the first thing I want to talk about. He wrote the book a long, long time ago, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he distinguishes between the proactive people who focus on what they can do and influence, and reactive people who focus their energy on things beyond their control. So in general, people who focus on things that they can control have a more positive outlook. So if I'm thinking about what this looks like for me in my life, for example, I have things I can control: what time I go to bed so I'm less tired, whether I drink enough water, if I'm setting healthy boundaries for work-life balance. Even though I can control these, sometimes I do these really badly. So even though I have a massive amount of control, I'm still choosing the wrong choices sometimes. There's a circle of influence. So workload versus hours in my working day, what my children eat and wear, for example, how I disagree with something in a staff meeting in order to make a positive change. So some things you have some control over, but not masses. And then your circle of concern, so stuff that you really can hopefully just let go because you can't do much about it individually. So the state of education as a whole. If my children eat enough veg with their school dinners was bothering me for a while, but I realised actually I'm not there to police it, so I'm going to let that one go. So the way my friend acts when someone offends her, can't control that, or an earthquake in another country, can't control those things. So I kind of wanted to go one step further with this, though, and just remodel it a bit more, because there's a lot of overlapping parts and nothing really fits neatly. So I came up with this continuum, and just thinking about how that circle of influence is quite large, and sometimes you have a small amount of influence and sometimes you have a big amount of influence depending on what there is. So I've plotted some SENCO statements on there. Just have a think about whether you consider that they're in the same place for you. So on here I've got full control on whether I drink enough water. That is all within my control. And also basically I've got control over what time I go to bed so I'm less tired, depending on if I've remembered to put the bins out and things like that. In my circle of influence, I've got some influence over my head teacher's opinion about inclusion. They might be a bit set in their ways and quite difficult to move on things, but I can try and have some influence there. Might not be as much as I want to. I've got a reasonable amount of influence about high quality teaching in classes, depending on the setup of your school, and you know, depending on the sort of quality of what's already set up and how SLT are also working together on that as well. Quite a lot of less control over workload versus hours in my working day, because there's always too much work but not enough time. Not a lot of control about EHCP consultation deadlines, but then if they try and sneak one in the summer, then I'm going to have something to say about that, and they won't be able to get away with that one if I'm on holiday. And less control over government agendas for SEND, although I can still do things like write to my MP, for example, and zero control over the earthquake. So just in that control, influence and concern, you can see where your things fit. So my circle of influence is larger than the other 2 circles, so the majority of issues fit in here. I could have a small degree of control or a larger one. And issues such as workload can go up or down, continuum, depending on external factors as well. And of course, there are always choices, so you might not be able to have much control over the way your colleague or parent acts, but you can set your boundaries. You might have unsympathetic line managers who do not support you, but you could ultimately look for work elsewhere. So I'm just going to go through in the next slides some common SENCO issues and just consider where they fit on your continuum. So we all know there's lots of issues in SENCOing at the moment, particularly, and no doubt there's some common themes. So just have a think about if these are issues for you. So people in school often don't understand this complex role that we have. Work-life balance is non-existent. Parents want the best for their children, but sometimes this doesn't align with what we can provide, and we're always the middleman between home and school. We are asked to take children in mainstream when it's not always the best place for them. Lack of own CPD, as we're generalists, not specialists. Lack of external agencies to support children with high needs, and a lack of EPs, LA support generally. Recruitment and retention of good quality support staff, general recruitment and retention crisis in schools. Post-pandemic lists are growing with no more resources to support, and I think everyone I've spoken to has particularly mentioned their year R and year ones this year, and they're kind of pulling their hair out because they're having all sorts of issues that they hadn't had previously. So just consider those things and whether they are a concern in your setting. So we've also got resource issues at a classroom level. So all these things ultimately affect our wellbeing, don't they? Because we haven't got enough time to get everything done that we need to. So just getting those basics in place, such as now, next board, safe spaces, and general high quality teaching issues. So it's a bit like spinning plates. I think you go and visit one teacher, you get it all sorted, and then you think, oh, brilliant, I've sorted all that, and you go back the next week and you can't, there's not a now and next board in sight. So yeah, it's having those things embedded and just keep going on about them really until they are embedded. And also, it's not just your job, it's the whole SLT job. So actually considering, where the remit for you individually stops and where your whole school as a whole ought to be taking over with that one. School and teacher knowledge and understanding of what actually is available to support children. I've got had in one school a lovely SENCO room with lots of resources. No one ever came in to look at them, so it's that question of getting them all out in classes. Budgets and some schools' unwillingness to invest in individuals, even though it would save money long term. So they're quibbling over a laptop when actually it's within the child's best interest. Lack of training about access arrangements and assistive technology in some secondaries especially. I've heard of SENCOs going into secondary schools and they haven't had that training that they need when those access arrangements are so important. We don't know the full extent of what's out there in terms of assistive technology, for example, speech to text or text to speech. And actually, there's so much free stuff out there now. And I think the SENCOs I've spoken to are so busy doing their day jobs, they haven't actually got time to investigate some of these really good resources. SENCO training to know what is easy, low cost first solutions, and inability to see the wood for the trees, really, because there is so much we can do. And all these things as a whole really affect our day-to-day well-being, particularly if other people in the school don't really understand the concerns. And of course, we've got our LA and national level issues, wider concerns, getting hold of those specialist teachers to make the resources recommendations to school, wider support from SEMH organisations who are already overstretched, schools making decisions whether to employ further pastoral support despite small budgets, LA is consistently unlawful in areas such as EHCP provision and processing times, unfair system for adding children to registers and getting EHCP help, and government's not listening to union and a lack of stability. I know over the pandemic I was speaking to my union representative and she was saying that the union leaders were talking to the government and they were agreeing with union leaders, and then they just went off and did what they wanted to do anyway, which is very, very frustrating. So all in all, if we put all those issues together, it is really difficult, isn't it? And if we link that to our own well-being, all reasons that make our own well-being very difficult. But of course, there are many positives as well, because we don't want to always go on about the negatives. So knowledge continues to increase about best practice and various conditions, for example, autism in girls recently. Individuals in schools are working tirelessly for children and everyone's doing an amazing job in a difficult situation. Assistive technology is increasing in usefulness and decreasing in price. That's always a bonus. Early intervention has been increasingly recognised. Not that there's always the funding for it, but we know how important it is. Many schools are working tirelessly to ensure inclusion is at their heart and their schools and pupils better for it. SEMH understanding is much improved for both staff and pupils. And in the right circumstances, this is of course the best job in the world, and there's not a job in a school that I'd rather do than be a SENCO, despite all those difficulties. So research around SENCOing, Vassar University did I think it was 2018, the original, but they did a 2020 review and had some key findings there about workload. So one of them, the time to complete EHCP plans and assessment requests, as well as the paperwork requirements from LAs in terms of providing evidence referrals to SEN teams, and needs assessment were cited as specific issues in schools because it takes a serious amount of time to do and is quite challenging. So the most commonly cited request by SENCOs to help them facilitate their role was more support, particularly more admin. And I say this time and time again because you're a very expensive admin person. So if any support in that area is going to be key for your reduced workload and increased well-being. So any extra support, it's worth asking your head teachers for that if possible. Simplified referral routes, ability to access timely, appropriate local authority support are cited as key changes which would positively impact on facilitation of the SENCO role. SENCO stated that it's more than expected of teachers as they are required to provide support within class, which previously may have been provided by an additional adult or through an intervention. Of course, with budgets being really difficult, it's being increasingly difficult as well. So in line with the previous survey, 96% of SENCOs and 96% of respondents think that SENCOs should have legally protected time, because at the moment it's quite sporadic in what SENCOs are actually getting in terms of release time. And 17% of SENCOs stated that they had been allocated more dedicated time to facilitate the role than in comparison to the previous academic year. And some of them still had stated that they had less allocated time. I think 50% said that they had the same amount of time. Oh yes, 50% said they had the same amount of time, but there was more expectations from senior leaders, including extra requirements which were unrelated to SENCO duties. So their remit was broadened. 3/4 of SENCOs cited administration tasks as taking up the majority of their allocated SENCO time. And nobody quite understands how much admin there actually is. I think you could stay at your laptop all day, every day, and it still wouldn't be done. So I've done a little bit of research as well for my book. And one of the things that I've had a look at is pay. Because also, just in terms of well-being, in work-life balance, money does come into it a little bit as well, because you do need to be comfortably off, and with the prices rising, it's kind of quite difficult to make ends meet as well on SENCO salary sometimes. So it was interesting to find out all the different ways in which SENCOs got paid, because actually it's a massive amount. I'm not going to go into detail of this, but what surprised me was that was like 15 or 16 different methods there of being paid, and I just think that we need to have something a little bit more standard nationally in terms of how we're getting paid, and just a little bit more guidance in that, so it's fairer for everybody, because some people weren't even getting sort of any remuneration for the work that they were doing. And some people had to wait until they were qualified to receive extra money, even though they were doing the job. Again, not helping your work-life balance. So Pearson have also done lots of research, and their school leader perspective, I just wanted to highlight here that they were asked what they expected to be the top 3 challenges for their school to manage over the next 18 months with budget pressures. And more than 1 in 3 school leaders think their school will reduce support staff or restrict use of resources or reduce spending over the next academic year. So that is a big concern for SENCOs, and it's difficult enough as it is, but with the decreased spending, it's a massive concern for work-life balance and well-being. So primary is at the top here, so we've got the budget pressures there, and we've got number 4, supporting students with SEND. So it's great and here that primary are saying that this is a big thing, that it's really big on the agenda, but without the budget to do that, it's going to be quite difficult. And with the secondary side of things, with the there's obviously the workload, the same as primary, but they're more focusing on the pupil mental health and well-being rather than the SEND, which is quite interesting, because I would hope that if the SEND and the well-being was sorted out in primary, hopefully there would be less ultimately in secondary with that early intervention. But I just thought that was an interesting bit of extra research to include there. And losing sleep, that is a massive part of your week, isn't it? The amount of sleep you get is really important so that you have really good quality well-being. So this teacher tap research was quite interesting, just to see how many people lost sleep over worry. And just thinking about everyone in the yellow and the red, it doesn't seem to matter how long you've been teaching in many years, although your less experienced teachers seem to be faring the worst here in the yellow and the red, the yellow particularly. I mean, there's a serious amount of people losing sleep over worry, and you really shouldn't be going to work to do that. So that's a tricky thing, isn't it, to balance, because it's such an important job. We have a lot of responsibility, and that doesn't help your well-being if you're losing sleep over worry. I'm sure a few of you are sitting here thinking that that might be you in the red or the yellow. So moving on to how SENCOs are absolute superheroes and raising your own profile. So finish the doom and gloom bit and just really want to focus on the ways we can improve our SENCO lives and well-being in and out of school. So first of all, then, you know, you've got that situation. You might suffer from these symptoms in your role. You might not. Your head teacher and SLT don't have a clue what you do. Your colleagues in class can't understand why you're so busy. Parents of children can't understand why their child isn't getting any help despite a diagnosis. Parents of children with EHCPs can't understand why there is not an adult Velcro to their child now that they have this EHCP golden ticket. Your post-pandemic SEND registers got larger. Pupil wellbeing is at an all-time low with no SEMH-specific support available. Your LEA writes ridiculous statements on the HCPs. Your LEA appears to think that mainstream is suitable for everybody. You haven't been able to get hold of an education psychologist for 6 months. And regardless of how much you work at home, your work is never done. And, you know, I have lived and breathed this myself, so I know exactly what it's like to be in a situation like this. So I've kind of thought long and hard just to consider ways of raising profile of SENCOs and the understanding of the role. So I've come up with these ideas, which hopefully will support you in standing your ground in those difficult work-life balance conversations. So first, with the transparency side of things, for your colleagues to start to appreciate how much is on your plate, just make a list of the tasks that you complete on a daily, weekly, half-termly, termly, yearly, and an ad hoc basis. Remember to add in that currently Maisie is spending a significant amount of time with you due to difficulties in class, and Ethan often screams for the first 45 minutes of the day, and that Mrs. Cook is on the phone to you for at least an hour a week with concerns about Jacob. So all these extras result in you being further behind with your workload than you even were to start with. So you can write an approximate time for things such as an EHCP application. In one school I worked in, I was told that I ought to be able to bang it out in an hour. So how I laughed, seriously. So you'd be surprised how long that list gets once you get going. So on my website, there's a SENCO resources page on there, and there's actually a form for this that you can download and fill in about workload just to start those conversations. So when you've completed that, just share it with everybody and anyone who'll listen, really, just to outline what goes on, particularly anything you do at home as well. So the next one is all about timetabling. So quite often my day seemed quite haphazard, quite unstrategic, and if I had to explain to someone what actually happened, I would struggle. I might finish a third of a job, for example, before something happened I'm needed for. As a profession, we do a lot of firefighting and less fire prevention. So to combat this, I printed out a timetable on a Monday with what I planned to do for the week, and then annotated with what actually happened, which included that lack of lunch break or any break. So you can submit this to your head at the end of your week, just to evidence what you've done, really. And I was quite lucky that I was quite autonomous in what I was doing. I had free rein, really. But I also wanted my head to know what I was doing, so I kind of did this on a voluntary basis. So if my head considered that there was a better way of spending my time, then I was all ears, and I was open to hearing it. This is not the same as being micromanaged, because I've chosen to do it myself and it wasn't expected. But if you are in a situation where you are being micromanaged, remember to write down everything that you do and you're not doing, but that you need to do, as well as how much time is spent on you being accountable as opposed to actually doing your job, because too much micromanaging is actually a bit of an issue as well in some situations. Seeking support. It is really tempting just to get on with it as your day job leaks into evenings and weekends, and that EHCP application still goes unwritten. And unfortunately, at the end, it's that individual child that ultimately suffers and doesn't sit well with our naturally empathetic souls. So I'd say that SENCO guilt to me has been worse than teacher guilt, as things that remain undone because they haven't had a fixed deadline have had direct impact on individual children. So the perfectionist in me always struggled to balance the tidal wave of expectations and paperwork. And historically, I haven't been very good at asking for help either. So you know, it's difficult if you don't complain about your workload unless you've actually voiced your concerns to the right people. So it's all very well complaining to your colleagues, but you do need to make sure that you speak to SLT about workload issue. So it's difficult, isn't it? Asking for help alongside the timetabling exercise in point 2 is even better. So it's clear from your timetable that something has to give, and then you can pass this decision up the chain, so to speak, so that your head can have a chat with you, and then they tell you where they think that you should focus. And hopefully you can get some admin support if you're lucky. So next one is all about networking. It's a really lonely job when you're the only one in the school. So taking any opportunities you can to build that network. There are so many groups on Facebook, such as this one, for example. You can go to help and ask questions and get support. I've got an Essex specific one as well, if anyone are you in Essex. And, you know, just see if you can network with the school up the road or create your own cluster if there's not a cluster available. So many common threads for SENCO grievances. It's much better to ask advice of people that actually understand it. So I know whenever I've put anything in the groups, everyone has been very keen to jump on and give me a hand, which is fantastic. Next, I've got parental communication. So if there's one piece of advice I'd offer a new SENCO, it will be to get in first with the parental communication. Not to say I've always managed this very well. So I've heard from so many parents on forums saying that SENCO hasn't got back to them. And I know how easily and quickly a disgruntled parent can go over your head and raise it with the head rather than speaking directly to you. You know, after the pandemic as well, the homeschooling parents are much more aware of difficulties that their children are facing. So I would always recommend making that half-termly phone call to them of all your one-plan children if you can, and just building the relationships up with the parents. I made some really good parental relations over lockdown. I tried really hard while I was still working in school to keep them, and also noticed a direct correlation in that in comparison to parental gratitude as a result as well, which was quite handy. And when in a job role where the thanks can be quite scarce, any extra thank yous go a long way. Next, I have got, gone too many, training. So point out regularly that you're a generalist when it comes to your niche SEND needs. You can't be expected to have all the answers for the rare condition that comes to light. You need support and training as well. We have specialist teachers in Essex for some areas, but I know that other areas have little support now since they restructured. Request training if needed for specific needs, and include other adults who work with the child as well. If your staff are well trained, then they will need you less, which will give you more time for your other responsibilities. And of course, the class teacher has many responsibilities. All too often it's left to the SENCO to be a miracle worker for what is actually class teacher's remit. So raising your profile in staff meetings is really important, using that code of practice to highlight that every teacher is a teacher of SEND, as well as all the other things that should be addressed in class, such as high quality teaching. So I used to use an initial concern form, with the idea being that I don't even go and see a child unless class teacher show me what high quality teaching strategies that they've had a go at doing first. I mean, realistically, I'm a bit kinder than that and not that mean. If anyone does need help, I will go and see them. But I do like to see that the brain breaks are in place, the safe spaces, now and next boards, depending on need, of course, word mats. There should be standard practice, as should the scaffolding side of things. And yeah, if you go on my SENCO resources page on my website, I've got lots of I've got concern forms for teachers and lots of goodies and free stuff there for that as well. Working in your own time, yes, we all do it, and I've often been guilty of working till midnight on my days off in order to keep on top of my workload, and this has been at detriment of spending time with my family. Yes, you'll look super efficient sometimes, but I think you'll also end up with more work to do as you're clearly keeping up. I was guilty always of, when I got into a new job, of being overly enthusiastic, wanting to create a good impression, which just meant I ended up being some sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'd just do loads and loads of work to make sure I was on top of things and looking like I had it all in hand, which meant I just had to keep up with what I was already doing. So your level of productivity is assumed based on what you've previously produced. So on your transparency timetable, just remember to include again what's done from home, how many hours something has taken, and share this information and reduce what can be done at home. No line manager who actually cares about your well-being would want you to work all night, and it's about time we held the profession accountable for these unwritten assumptions of what our capacity is as well. And I think this goes for other areas of education also. So it can be really easy to get overwhelmed in this role, and even if you have successfully ridden the wave for some time, there might be a point that for some reason you start to go under it. If your workload is unsustainable and unreasonable and no one is helping you to reduce it, then you need to start reflecting a little bit more deeply, I think, because I know that I think the shelf life of a teacher at the moment from starting out is 5 years at the moment, and I know also that there are a lot of SENCOs who are burning out as well. So really we need to just kind of reduce that burnout and just make sure that we are looking after ourselves a bit more. So next thing I've got here is just the bigger picture really of a mentally healthy workplace, because it's not just about you raising your own profile, it's considering what your workplace is like to work in as well. So these on the left were important areas from the mental health first aid training materials. And in order to create a mentally healthy workplaces, it was suggested that individuals have greater autonomy, people were involved in decision making, line managers trained to ensure that they can manage delegation of control and decision making, which can be a bit tricky these days because people are getting promoted earlier and earlier just because there are gaps in leadership. Promote good leadership and relationships. Employees buy into organisational goals, allowing greater flexibility in the workplace, reward commitment and effort, reduce stress and ensure early intervention. So just consider for a minute with your workplace how that actually fits with you and if your workplace are showing those attributes. If they are not, there are some things that you might be able to have a go at doing. So not necessarily on your own, with a group or other people, petition your SLT to just consider whole school wellbeing. Have a committee that's not about cake and yoga, which is about core values and more important things. Think about whether you can all do mental health first aid as part of your whole school CPD. I'd worry if anybody said no to that, because that's really important. Have a staff meeting to set a wellbeing policy to support everybody, heads included, because often heads are overwhelmed and underappreciated as well. Setting healthy communication boundaries. This is particularly important for SENCOs because we're often available 24/7. I know I was to parents. Parents would sort of message me at, I don't know, 7, 8 o'clock at night, and I would generally reply, and sometimes I go, oh, I wasn't expecting you to reply, or sometimes I'd expect an instant answer. So it's setting those communication boundaries for you. Ensuring the rules are followed, for example, directed time, lunch duty, etc. And reflecting on how far you're willing to go in your individual circumstances in order to improve things, and consider what you want to do if nothing improves as well, depending on your situation. So I've also got some top 10 tips for mental health and wellbeing, and these are not just tips for like SENCOs, they work for everybody in any workplace. So I've written quite a lot on this subject over the last few years, and ultimately though, tips for mental health boil down to some simple things, although achieving them when real life gets in the way is often not so simple. And if you're anything like me, you might fail at the first hurdle and just forget to think about yourself when you're a notorious people pleaser. Or you might eat well for 4 weeks and a crisis sends you straight to the ice cream. So if you're looking at these 10 tips and thinking that you're managing maybe 70% of half of them, then you're heading in the right direction. So just consider, on a scale of 0 to 100%, just reflect on where you are currently and where you'd like to be for each of these areas, and then hopefully you'll know where to focus your time in the shorter term, because actually what you focus on increases. So if you put a concerted effort into improving your own mental health and well-being, then I would hope that even if it's small steps, then something will improve. So first of all, I've got putting yourself and your needs higher on your agenda, because we're all rubbish at putting ourselves first. So take a step back and speak to yourself as your best friend or close family member would. What would they suggest you do? SENCOing can be lonely and you're busy supporting everyone else but not yourself. So even if you can't put yourself at the top, I'm not keen on ones that say put yourself at the top of the list, because actually sometimes that's not feasible. You've got children to look after, but at least try and put yourself slightly higher up your own agenda. Also, it's a wellbeing thing to support everybody. Just pay it forward. If somebody else needs a hand, then you might be the one to check in on them. So don't assume that somebody else will. We all have colleagues, a collective responsibility to colleagues and people in our lives. Networking for SENCOs can really help with this, as there's so much solidarity and common ground with our issues. So check in on your SENCO network as well. Putting inhibitions aside and speaking out when issues arise. It is hard to ask for help. Swallow your pride and do it anyway. Better to catch it early. I'm imagining a future world where everyone feels happy to speak freely about their mental health. We're not there yet, but we can collectively move towards this level of overcoming inhibitions in this area. Again, our SENCO networks are great for this. If you're struggling to say something, 25 people will likely jump on your post and offer support if you put it on there. Finding your passion and doing more of what makes you happy. Everyone needs a hobby, whether you're lucky enough to work in a field that you're passionate about, or you look forward to taking part in your own hobby when you get home from work. Having things to look forward to is key in supporting your own mental health. If you're unsure, try some new things until you find something you love. Might also turn into a side hustle and an early retirement plan if you're lucky. I was speaking to a SENCO a few weeks ago who was totally burnt out and had nothing in her life that brought her joy, which is a really sad situation to be in. And so she eventually had to go at joining a choir, which she was really enjoying. And I spoke to her last week and she was just really enjoying just once a week. It gave her something to look forward to, and that just made everything a little bit better for her, because if your job's tough and your home life's tough, and you just need something to look forward to every week, really. Getting enough rest and addressing those underlying causes of rest as well. And I love my sleep, but I also work late a lot as my house is nice and quiet. If you're burning the candle at both ends, then trying to set more healthy boundaries or enlist expert help if your sleep issues are more difficult to solve. So we all get those Ofsted dreams and we can't switch off from time to time, but if it's regular, then delve a bit deeper and address the causes. If you're sleeping little due to work, then you're giving away too much of yourself, and that really needs to be sorted out. Seeking healthier food that you love, and then of course eating more of it. We have busy lives, and when you're eating on the hop, junk food is quick and convenient and cheap. So just taking steps to plan ahead as far as possible, trying new healthy food and adding it into your diet. If you're really brave, cutting out sugar for a few weeks so you rediscover how naturally sweet and tasty healthy food is. As refined sugar definitely dulls your sweet sensors, and I tried this last year. I managed 12 weeks, but the first 3 days was awful, and I just ended up with like sugar withdrawal, headaches and things like that. But now I've done it once, I know I can do it again, so it's on my plan to do that again. Remember also to eat regularly as well, as it's really easy if you haven't got a class or a timetable that means you have to be somewhere, or you have lunch in the staff room. If you don't do that, then it's really easy to skip lunch. Plan those healthy snacks for your desk drawer. I'm a terrible role model for this, and I epically failed in this area generally. So don't do as I do. Do as I'm suggesting. Next one is exercising. So finding exercise that you find fun and doing more of it. So many options now to exercise, and you can even get the gym on prescription from the doctor in certain circumstances as well. So see if you can try something new or rediscover something you used to love. Plan it into your weekly schedule. A couple of SENCOs that I spoke to have able to plan a walk like 20 minutes or so on the way home every day. So depending on your circumstances, they just parked up somewhere in the woods, did a quick 20 minutes on the way home, which also cleared their heads and allowed them to go home without the mind clutter that we inevitably suffer from. There's so much going on during the day. Making those connections with like-minded people, being brave and taking the first step. Social media, of course, is great for this, and there's a group for everything. I've met loads of fantastic people since the world moved on to Zoom, and I've started to actively seek out like-minded people who enjoy the things I do. And so you just need to be a bit brave, really. Once you've been brave a few times, and walking into a room of unknown people or pressing the join button isn't quite so scary anymore. And of course, there's so many SENCO networks on Facebook, but SENsible SENCO is, of course, the best. And this is my unbiased opinion, because there's also, unlike the other groups, an awful lot more CPD and direct access to specialists. So that's even better. Spending time in nature and undertake other mindful practices. So I admit I'm a partial to a bit of tree hugging and forest bathing, which is not for everyone, but nature is really grounding and excellent for mental health. So are practices such as mindfulness, colouring, meditation or journaling, and just something where you can turn your brain off really and just be in the moment. It's really restorative. So I would put myself a couple of years ago in the person least likely to meditate category, but now I just find the head clearance really useful. So the only problem is that there's more headspace for all of my ideas to come in. So I just end up with too many ideas and not enough time to execute them all. But, this is also a great practice to instill in our pupils, particularly children with SEND needs for their regulation support as well. Number 10, positive mindset, going with the flow and having an attitude of gratitude. And actually, yes, I've thrown 3 in for number 10, but they're all very important. Having those positive outlooks, finding those silver linings are really helpful for mindset. Similarly, going with the flow, living in the present and not trying to control everything around you is equally freeing. My mantra is always, it could always be worse. And while practicing my attitude of gratitude, I always reflect on situations where it could have indeed been worse and generally conclude how lucky I am that it hasn't been that bad, as well as considering all the wonderful things I have to be thankful for. So sometimes it's just a shift in mindset, really. So you could start the day with being thankful for 3 things. And, it's quite easy in SENCOing and education in general to moan as there's a serious amount of issues, both nationally and individually in schools. But if we can try and focus on those positives as much as possible, it will certainly lift our mindset. So as I said, if you are managing maybe 50% of 7 of them, that's a really good start. So finally, for those who are at the end of their tether and who are reevaluating their life choices, I'd say just please don't give up on education and the wonderful role that is SENCOing. Just reflect on whether it's your school that's the issue and whether you'd thrive in a different environment just before you do anything drastic. So those are my 10 top tips. So that's the end of the main part of the presentation. I'm always here for questions as well. Hopefully I can see a few faces in a minute rather than talking to my camera. So you can find me in various different places. I've got my positiveyoungmind.com website, and on there's a SENCO resource section, and that has got lots and lots of free stuff, including that workload list that I mentioned. Maybe a few of you have already been on there already. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram, LinkedIn as well, and also Facebook. And I've got a YouTube channel with various snippets of wellbeing stuff on there as well. There's also a Coaching for Teacher Wellbeing group on Facebook also. And within my day job, I do lots of writing, do coaching and wellbeing packages in school, and send support and training for school teachers and parents as well. So I'm quite busy, but it's all been good fun so far. Lastly, I have a shameless plug because I managed to launch a children's book last week. So this is my children's book, which is on Amazon. So if you would like to have a little look, that would be fantastic. So I think it's definitely one of those things that was on my bucket list, which is very exciting to be able to achieve this year. So certainly one of the highlights. So there we go. Thank you very much for listening.
As per normal, though, as we had last time. There we go. The camera decided it wasn't going to work again.
Okay.
And I'm going to start choking now. Thank you, Lynn. That was really nice to listen to.
It felt like it went really quick, but I was looked at the clock and it was about the right amount of time. So
it was exactly the right amount of time. And we've got we were having a bit of a conversation going on the right hand side. So we were talking about how many years people have been teaching for. Alongside book recommendations, and the current conversation is around how on earth does anybody get a break time? Does anybody actually get a break time these days in school?
No. I mean, when I was a teacher, I was setting up for my next lesson. If it's wet play, I was in the classroom, and as a SENCO, there's normally someone kicking off, so I'd be doing that.
Yeah. I responded to it. So I used to do break duty 5 days a week because I ran the smaller base that was needed for those students who couldn't necessarily go outside. I was in there every lunchtime for the whole of lunchtime, although to be fair, I did get a free lunch in exchange for it. So swings and roundabouts, I suppose. Yeah. But I also had 3 meetings before school and 5 meetings after school. So Monday through to Friday, I'd got a meeting every day after school, and then still needed to do everything else. It was, yeah, ridiculous.
I think I didn't say actually, but one thing I've just thought of is sitting through irrelevant meetings as a SENCO is like, particularly if you don't have your laptop with you, is like the most depressing thing in the world. I know early years staff have the same issue if they're sitting through a staff meeting, it's not relevant to them. I'll add that on somewhere, because actually it's horrible, isn't it? You're like, it's not relevant to me, I've got 85 things to do, why am I here? So yeah, bring that up. At least bring
general staff training used to
email.
irritate me. Yeah. Why have I really got to learn how Sims operates? I don't use it. Just let me go and do my own thing, please.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's and I imagine these guys here probably feel the same way as well. And then they'll tell us that we've got non-contact periods. So, you know, you've got your PPA time, or we've got free time to be a SENCO. Yeah, right. Bring it on. Find me that time. Frustrating, definitely frustrating. Gavin's got his union hat on.
I put my union hat on, saying that within a 6-hour period of work, you should have 20 minutes of break time, which is legally enforceable. So you can go, I want my 20 minutes, which I have to have as break time.
The thing is with us SENCOs and the teaching profession is we're naturally empathetic people.
Yep, you are.
And I speak to my friends in different professions, and they go, I just wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't do it, and it would, it'd be fine. And the thing
they
would
probably also be the first person to kick off when their child is the one that needed you, and you were the one that went, no, I'm not doing it.
Not doing it. Yeah, not my job. Yeah.
We're
definitely taken advantage of on a national scale, just because we're such nice people. And I think also because, not being sexist in any way, we are generally women as well, and the workforce of women, it's like when that statistic about asking for pay rises, men are more likely to ask for a pay rise than a woman will. So it's just that collective female workforce that is also driving the difficulties, I think, in standing up for ourselves a little bit. Hopefully we'll all get better at that. I think if we had it collectively, took a stand, then that would be great. But you can't, you're one person in school quite often, and it's tricky. I mean, the new guidelines are looking quite promising, but there's so much infighting in the politics at the moment. Nothing's happening, is it?
Yeah, it's that ethical side of things. I know I'm studying my psychology units at the moment, and it's that if we don't do it, it's unethical. It's having an impact on a child and a child's future, which is why we feel compelled to do it, because otherwise it's wrong. But the more we continue doing it, we make more of a rod for our own back.
And I think a lot of the SENCOs that do stuff are there just for the children. They don't do it for the money. They are there to help the pupils that are there for them, and they want to kind of see them do as best that they possibly can do. And then that does drive you to kind of do whatever you possibly can do in the time that you've got within that, not to look after yourself, but to look after
definitely
somebody else.
And there's a lack of praise as well, just generally in organisations. I have to say, since leaving education, I've had more praise in the first 6 months than I had in 10 years, I reckon, in not just one school, various different schools. So
no, you're absolutely right. Right. And somebody was asking earlier about legal training and SEN training. Again, since I came out of school, I have had access to more SEN training than I ever had as 25 years in school.
I know. I'm amazed. I'm learning loads.
I know. It's kind of, and time to read books as well, which is, a real luxury. But it's we have access to so much information, but when we're in schools, we don't get prioritised. We don't get the time to go out there.
Blinkered in what's in front of us, aren't we? We all can see is that child in front of us. There's nothing else.
The child that's in front of you, the numbers that you need to get for your Ofsted reviews, and that's about it. They don't Ofsted, what? What's that?
You can't use Ofsted, it's a swear word.
It's not a swear word. Ofsted are lovely. We love Ofsted. Ofsted, if you're sitting in the background there, we love you really. Don't give us bad Ofsted review. Thank you.
I have lots of yeah, time is ago. I used to read on a Friday night, so I know that Lynn call's gone out. I know that Lynn takes her children swimming on a Thursday usually, and I can guarantee she's probably sat there with something reading. You find your slots for doing various bits and pieces, but it really is about prioritizing yourself, and we don't do it very often. We just don't make time for ourselves to do it. And I love what Fiona says. It's about the children. You can't just say to a screaming child, "Oh, sorry, it's my break time."
No,
Much as we'd love to.
But there should be someone else there that can take after that child look after that child while you have your break. There always should be somebody there, and the staffing ratio at the moment within schools and TAs and everything else. We've all talked about that before. In your dreams, exactly.
Definitely.
Isn't there?
We all do.
I've been teaching 20 years now, and nothing would probably surprise me, but I've learned my SENCOing role through the trial and error of strategies that I've picked up over 20 years. Of what works with individuals and what didn't, and I've never met the same child twice, and it's just kind of a trial and error type thing. But no one's ever taught me that. It's just, and sometimes you go from a SENCO. From class teacher, you might have only been teaching for a year, so you've got less in your toolkit. So you're a fantastic SENCO, but you need that extra input, don't you, about all these strategies. Or also you've got the whole other issue of trying to manage people when you've gone straight from the classroom to SENCOing. Luckily enough, I was an assistant head before I was a SENCO, so I had all that in hand. That wasn't so bad, but it's a very big step up.
It's a massive step up
to go to SENCO.
Yeah. I don't think anything teaches you how to handle children. Not so much of an issue because that's teaching. And that those elements of our radar, handling adults, they are totally different, aren't they? And they're not easy. They're awkward,
very
and stubborn. Yeah, they're all on the call. They're awkward and they're stubborn and they're set in their ways and they think they're right. And it is so much more difficult to handle adults than it is to handle children most of the time. Whether that's our support staff or our teaching staff or the professionals we're dealing with, or even our parents. So, I try not to downgrade our parents and dismiss them, but some parents can be very difficult to manage, very difficult to work with. Many inexperienced staff that you are supporting as an experienced SENCO, they don't yet have any tools in their toolkit. They rely on you.
That's another big bugbear of mine.
We need something in teacher training. There's got to be something. And let's not even go down recruitment. Recruitment of teachers, recruitment of TAs, recruitment of anything and everything at the moment. But it's not just recruitment, it's retention. Recruitment wouldn't actually be so much of an issue if it wasn't for the fact we're not actually able to retain anybody.
And
at the moment.
There's a lot of people in here that's got like 25 odd years experience within this party of people here. But Lynn was saying that it's 5 years now. At 5 years, you do all your degree and everything else to take a job for 5 years, and that's it. I don't
think I even had my toolkit at the end of 5 years, though, to be honest. I think I'd only just kind of sunk my teeth into things.
Nothing even prepares you for that NQT year, because training in comparison to the NQT year, it's a massive step up. So once you've realised, and some schools are not even very supportive of their ECTs. They don't mentor them correctly. It's a really tricky situation at the moment. And
absolutely,
it's very tricky.
We've got our inexperienced staff are a higher ratio to the experienced staff, which does make things tricky, definitely. And Melanie, I so want to read it because I have done this before. How many support staff would be on the SEN register undiagnosed if we actually did one? It makes supporting the staff more tricky too.
It's in this checklist.
We've done it. We did it in a staff meeting once where we got staff to tick lists for themselves, and it was interesting what came out of it. Pippa says she's had 15 new LSAs this term. Wow, well done. Okay. Well, how did you manage that? But only 2 had experience in schools.
How many of them are left though after a term?
Yeah, that's true. Are they agency staff that only last a week, 2 weeks? I don't know.
I'm sure their school's wonderful, so they all want to stay. Yeah.
Still got Right, we need to know your recruitment strategy to get 15, Pippa, because some schools can't even get 1.
It's also that networking divide, isn't it, of leafy suburbia versus deprived areas, because the calibre of a person you're going to pick up in a local area, because TAs are often local to their area,
Yep.
aren't they? And the calibre is so much different from what you in some of the leafy schools I've worked in comparison to some of the disadvantaged schools. So yeah, it's very tricky. Just to like, sometimes basic English is really difficult for people who've I think there was a while ago you had to have qualifications in maths, English and science, etc., for it to become an LSA, but it's just the grammar is shocking.
Yeah, they don't need the qualifications now, unless they're doing a level 3 qualification, in which case they need to pass their functional skills level 2 before they actually get that qualification, which is fine. So Pippa said she's taken some ex-sixth formers looking for experience before university. She expects to lose 10 of them in July. So you're obviously a secondary school, Pippa. I've done that though. I find that they're a little too immature for working with the students. I could put them just about with year 7, but they're not quite.
I was
ready.
a horrendous TA.
Yeah, you
I'm
were.
going to say I was absolutely. I did TA for 2
awful.
years and I was awful at it. I just wanted to play with all the students constantly.
You'd have got Mrs. Howe telling off if you were in my class.
And he was in his 20s at the time.
I was
as
in
well.
my 20s at the time as well.
I used to go, who's that tapping? Oh, it's you.
Fiona's had her applications out since May. She's now interviewing ones that they wouldn't even have shortlisted 12 months ago. Losing TAs because they can't afford to live in the area. Yeah, definitely. Or even they're having to take multiple jobs and then prioritise which one's which. Take on apprentices who are it depends, Jo. So like I say, I run the apprenticeship programme, and you don't have to pay them the apprenticeship wage. You can pay them national minimum wage. You can pay them a normal TA salary. You don't have to pay them the apprenticeship wage. I know that schools do that because it is cheaper. It's only £4.81 an hour, but it's not ideal. It's not perfect, and it's certainly not going to retain them.
We had apprentices that couldn't eat, and actually they were on the breadline as much as some of our deprived children, and we ended up giving them free school dinners, just things like that, so that they could survive.
One of mine previously, I'm going back quite a few years ago now, we actually paid for her bus pass, and we used to give her the free school meals on top of her apprenticeship wage. But our oldest son actually started an apprenticeship in early years back in September, and by the time he'd worked out his salary, he was actually spending more money on bus fares to get there and back than he was actually bringing home at the end of the day. And he just turned around to them in the end and said, it isn't worth me doing it. So they declined to pass his probation, which was fair enough, but they just can't afford to do it. So, I work with a school down in London, in one of the London boroughs, and they had a fair number of TAs. I think they were on 23 when I went down. But when you looked at their number of EHCPs and you looked at their level of need, they needed at least 40 TAs for it to be effective. And to be fair, their governors put the money behind it.
But they were running through them very, very quickly for an agency. Bang, there goes another one. Bang, there goes another one. Bang, there goes another one, which is just crazy.
An agency TAs, there's no investment in it. So.
And when you get a classroom with 4 adults in, it can be really confusing as well for the children and they've got double standards of whether they're allowed to go to the toilet or not, and you never know where the children are. So you have to manage that quite carefully as well if you've got extra adults.
Agency TAs recently haven't been great. No, I think because they've signed on with an agency because they can't sign on with anything else, Pippa. There are probably some fantastic agency TAs out there. I am generalising.
We did see a few agency TAs that were really, really good.
Yeah.
Fell asleep
in lesson 1, probably because they've been working a night shift in a warehouse the night before, and they're doing several jobs to make ends meet. It's not fair. They can be, Fiona. It depends what kind of deal you get. I get the school that I work with. They actually have a deal with the agency that if The agency sends them the TA, and then after
12.
2 weeks, no, it's 2
Okay.
weeks. After 2 weeks, if the school thinks they're any good, they will take them on a 6-week probationary contract, and there is no fine, there is no fee for that or anything. So they're only paying the agency wage for that period of time. It's persuading the TAs though, because agency wages tend to be slightly higher because they don't get their holidays and they don't have their sick pay and all the rest of it. When they go onto the school contract, it looks like their salaries go down, so that they kind of go, oh, I'm not so sure about this. I don't think this is better. I might as well go back to the agency, which, you know, you can't blame them, to be honest.
It's the same with a lot of jobs where I work for my driving company. We've got the same kind of problem with that, massive retention issues in drivers for trucks. And then the agency staff are actually paid a lot more than the normal truck drivers are.
We completely diverged.
We're meant to be talking about well-being, but we've talked about.
We are talking about well-being. It is well-being.
TAs have a massive impact on SENCO's well-being for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They propped me up multiple times.
Something that really helped was having a lead LSA. I found in the best school that I worked in for LSAs, having a lead LSA where the LSAs all go and like tell their woes to. Yeah, and they phone the lead LSA if they're sick, so you don't have to worry about, and lead LSA then redeploys, so you don't have to worry about that layer. That was really good. It's a really rubbish job for the lead LSA, to be fair, but it was great for everybody else. So I'd recommend that one as well. Go back to your SLT and ask for a lead LSA role to take that off you a little bit.
And then there's the other issue that schools are struggling with cover for missing teachers. So we end up with, oh, can I just borrow your TA to do that? And partly it's wrong for the TA because they're not being paid that salary. They're not being paid as a teacher. But also it's taking the TA away from, or the LSA, away from what their actual job is, which is to support those students. And I don't think senior leadership teams always see that kind of bigger picture. They just say, I need to put an adult in front of this class of students and there's one over there, they'll do.
Yeah, it devalues our teaching qualifications if it happens too much as well.
So you've got 2 books, Lynn. We've got the Rainbow Book.
Yes, next one's coming out.
I didn't bring it down, no, it's up in the house.
It's up in the house.
The Rainbow Book, which our son has got up in the house. Have you got it in front of you? Flash it up on the screen.
I haven't
Remind me what the other one's called and when it's coming
out.
The
other one is it's out in February time, I think. So it's like a SENCO survival guide. So it's all my sort of snippets of things that I've picked up over 20 years, all crammed in one book.
There we go. Excellent.
And it goes through as well, just from the start of, do you even want to be a SENCO, to sort of the interview process, what you might be asked and the interview questions and things like that, and and how the job is quite different to what you think it's going to be.
Yeah,
it's a great job, just in lots of hints and tips. Is the raising your profiles in there, as well as working with parents and all those tips of the trade really that I've developed mainly through doing things really badly and then learning from it.
Hey, that's how we learn.
Mistake twice, just make different ones. I think that's it, isn't it?
It's what we say to children, isn't it? That they're allowed to make mistakes so long as they learn from them.
Yep.
So
yeah, if you follow my author profile on Amazon, actually, you'll probably get informed when the next one's coming. So do that.
And I'm sure that it's Hinton House, isn't it? Your 3.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure they will organise a discount for us.
Oh,
no, Lynn can just give us a discount. They don't need to go for
okay.
straight to the author.
Just buy direct, and then we can just organise our own discount.
Brilliant. So we will look out for that one. We were posting some books on the side panel. They were Jessica Kingsley publishing. If anybody is interested in those, then we will organise a discount.
We've got a bit of a deal going with Jessica Kingsley at the moment, so they're going to do us a fairly hefty discount on books for them. You'll just have to kind of keep an eye out for when we actually sign the deal with them.
Yeah. So a nice way of getting your SENCPD library sorted out with some decent texts in there. Anyway, Lynn, thank you very much for this evening. If anybody has got any more questions, you have got about 30 seconds to type them in that chat bit on the right-hand side.
I know we've gone over time.
We find me on Facebook and PM me if you want as well. That's fine.
There we go.